Hi, my name is Joe Halawani, and this is the first episode of Halifax. Halifax will be a music coverage channel that will focus on multiple genres of music, doing album reviews, coverage of music news and shows, as well as upcoming releases, and many more. I myself am a journalist experienced in radio as well. On today's first episode of the show, it will be a series going over what I personally think were the best records of 2017. Kicking this list off is post-hardcore band from Long Island, Glassjaw, with their third album, Material Control. While the band released two albums in the early 2000s, they broke up in 2004 following a hiatus. And then they continued to do live shows in 2007, however, wouldn't release anything new until their 2011 EP, Coloring Book. This new album, Material Control, serves as their third and their first full length in 15 years. The new record is undoubtedly the band's heaviest record to date. The first couple of tracks, both released prior to the entire new record, are without a doubt the album's biggest one-two punch of the record. Other than the noticeably heavier instrumentation and thicker production stemming from these lead-off tracks, Shira and New White Extremity, another focal point in the band's sound is lead singer Daryl Palumbo. Palumbo originally could be compared to, I would say, maybe Brandon Boyd of Incubus or Jonah Matranga from Far, but on this new record, he sounds like he's gaining, inspiration from more direct influences, such as Chino Moreno of Deftones, and even at times Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction. While this style is not considered to be one of the more unique offerings from the genre, it definitely serves as an advantage to the band's sound on this new record. On Material Control, there are times where Palumbo's vocals sound like they get lost in the chaos of the music and don't really add anything more to it. This can be found on the songs My Conscience Weighs a Ton, Bible Land 6, and especially the eerily wrung out notes on the song Citizen. My only other complaint with this record is for how short it is. Some of the moments are less focused dabblings into other genres and don't really feel as vital as the rest of the track list. This can be seen on the cuts Strange Hours, Bastille Day, and the title track Material Control. Overall, this album is definitely a triumphant return for the band, proving they're willing to take risks and expand their sound into new territory, while the majority of the track list exudes absolutely pummeling and shredding hooks that will excite many longtime fans of the band and newcomers alike. Number 24 is Manchester Orchestra's fifth album and their biggest stylistic jump to date with A Black Mile to the Surface. Now, I've always liked this band, but the thing is, their first two albums definitely excite me the most, which are Like a Virgin Losing a Child and Mean Everything to Nothing. And on their third album, Simple Math, they kind of just settled for a very generic, indie rock sound, and I just was kind of lost from there. But they did bounce back a little stronger on their follow-up to that, Cope, in 2014, and even though it definitely sounds like it jumps back to their earlier sound, it's not as hard-hitting and the songs aren't really, as memorable, other than the ironically titled song, Top Notch. On their fifth album, A Black Mile to the Surface, Manchester Orchestra go for a more indie folk and adult alternative style this time around. While lead vocalist and guitarist Andy Hull described the nature of the album as stripped back and intensity without the volume, this album definitely fits the narrative of that because it truly evokes an uplifting, serene, and cinematic essence from beginning to end. Now, while the album is definitely a cohesive, pleasant listen, there are spots in the album that could have used more experimentation and originality. This notion becomes apparent on the safer tracks on the album, The Maze, The Alien, and The Wolf, which all don't sound too far from, I could say, what Mumford & Sons are doing these days. The brighter spots on the album, however, are what make this album stand out and shine, really, on lead single The Gold, lead South Dakota, and the song The Mistake. Overall, A Black Mile to the Surface turns a new leaf for Manchester Orchestra, and where they now stand in the realm of contemporary indie rock. But it definitely leaves room for more experimentation, and it leaves fans of the band wanting more. Number 23 is Fresh Air by Homeshake. Homeshake is a recording project by Montreal-based singer-songwriter Peter Sager, who is best known as the former guitarist of Mac DeMarco's touring band. While in the past, Sager's work with Homeshake has kind of sounded a lot like Mac DeMarco's first two records, His new album is kind of a breath of fresh air. On Fresh Air, it sees Homeshake diving into more yacht rock and R&B stylings of the 70s and 90s alike, while incorporating his signature synth pop and chillwave sound. While that definitely breaks new ground for Homeshake, the record and the vocals can get a little bit repetitive the longer you listen, though the culmination of his falsetto and lazy vocal style definitely fits the narrative of the record. It's the more dominantly jazz and funk-based songs that make Sager's vocals stand out, especially on the lead singles Call Me Up and Every Single Thing. Now, these songs show Sager guiding the track with his vocals rather than the melody of the songs doing it for him. The latter, however, is what makes some of these songs drag on, especially on the title track and the song This Way. Hopefully he overcomes that while creating a more cohesively paced effort next time around. Number 22 is Cloud Nothing's Life Without Sound. Cloud Nothing's return with a more refined, straightforward pop-punk and alt-rock flavor on their fourth record, Life Without Sound. Since their beginning, the Cleveland outfit have consistently gravitated towards different genres with each release. Their self-titled debut album, solely composed by frontman Dylan Baldy, is a mess of heavily drowned-out, lo-fi surf rock, which at the time of its release was a completely oversaturated style with bands like Waves, Best Coast, and pretty much every other band with a beach-related name at the time. Quickly after this release, Baldy returned with the members of his touring band as full-time members and made a very drastic turnaround with their follow-up and most critically acclaimed record to date with Attack on Memory. Attack on Memory, produced by the legendary Steve Albini, is rooted in indie, punk, post-hardcore, and at times emo and noise rock influence. Though the album sees the band wearing their influences on their sleeves, it did make the album feel uneven, as it had no core sound throughout or distinctive songwriting of their own, which ended up being the case more strongly on the band's third record, Here and Nowhere Else. On the band's latest release, Life Without Sound, Cloud Nothings have strayed even further away stylistically by going for a more polished and accessible indie and pop-punk style. In addition to this new direction, the album includes new lead guitarist Chris Brown following Joe Boyd's departure. While the album contains some of the warmest sounding songs the band's written, lyrically, the album contains the band's darkest moments, with themes of existentialism, isolation, and self-evaluation. I knew peace in the terror of the mind, exhales Baldy as the Death Cab for Cutie tinged cut up to the surface fades out. For the most part, the theme of the album deals with a sense of, confliction and uncertainty of having expectations for your own life. The album all around is less sporadic than previous efforts and shows the band writing more structured and melodic rock songs with some brooding slow burners, which the latter being one of the consistent elements of a Cloud Nothings record. While this new direction suits the band and I'd like to see them work on their current style to craft their own distinction within it, it's probably more likely to expect a band who's consistently been inconsistent to stay at their unpredictable chameleon-like status. But then again, maybe not. 21. Always Antisocialites. Antisocialites is the sophomore record by Toronto indie jangle and dream pop band Always. The band broke right out of the gate with their well-received self-titled debut in 2014, while it led them to progressively playing bigger shows like Glastonbury and Coachella 2015 and 2016 respectively. While there was definitely a buzz about the band, their debut didn't have the most unique songwriting so far, the lo-fi dream pop style they were always playing to. However, the band truly honed their songwriting capabilities this time around with Antisocialites. The sophomore release sees Always stepping their sound up with a sweeter, earnest, and more beautifully atmospheric version of themselves. The opening track on the album, The Undertow, really sets the tone of the album, musically and lyrically, as the dreamy synth lines lead to Molly Rankin's embrace of letting go of a past lover by telling them you find a way to hold on as long as you can, to assure them it's abundantly clear that the relationship has run its course. This disposition is the central theme of the record, as Rankin is embracing her sense of moving on and rediscovering herself in the process, especially on the song The Undertow, as well as Not My Baby and the inviting balladry of the closing track, Forget About Life. While the songs are mostly down-tempo throughout, there are moments that breathe in new life for the group. On the songs Hey, which has a post-punk ambience that definitely suits the band's current sound, while the songs Pismal Punks and Saved by a Wave both sound like a culmination of 80s new wave and pop with a punk urgency. which definitely gives the instrumentation more room to spread its wings. While some could claim Always aren't the most original sounding band in the genre, they are most certainly not vacant songwriters by any means, on Antisocialites especially. They're proving they're one of the more interesting and energetic offerings to this soundscape. Number 20, Salutations by Conor Oberst. Multi-instrumentalist and Nebraska native Conor Oberst, who is best known for his work with Bright Eyes, Desaparecidos, and Monsters of Folk, among many others, returns with his 8th solo studio record entitled Salutations. Prior to this release, Oberst released the first album fully composed and on his own, containing piano and acoustic ballads entitled Ruminations. Salutations sees Oberst return with a full band to reimagine the entire Ruminations album with the addition of 7 new tracks. This record brings the rawness of the Ruminations tracks to a more upbeat and fuller Heartland aesthetic. While these tracks on their own are great renditions, the results are a bit hit and miss when compared to the emotional resonance that stems from the songs on his predecessor. The biggest victim of this goes to Ruminations' 2 closing tracks, which, mind you, don't appear in the same order here. You All Loved Him Once, and Till St. Diphnah Kicks Us Out. These 2 cuts felt more emotionally compelling and put up against another as a closing statement from Oberst rather than how they are scattered throughout the track list on Salutations. These 2 cuts felt more emotionally compelling put up against each other as a closing statement from Oberst rather than how they are scattered throughout the track list on Salutations. However, the other revisions of all these songs certainly have a comfortable place between the new ones on this album. Opening track Too Late to Fixate, one of the newly written tracks for the record, sees Oberst embody a comically sarcastic appreciation of how he feels at this point in his life, stating, "No, I don't mind the money, it beats betting on sports, and though it might get expensive, it's cheaper than divorce." Fans of Oberst's work may observe that these themes aren't relatively fresh for him, though stylistically his past few records definitely have been. Among the new tracks, Overdue, Napalm, and the title track Salutations are undoubtedly its standouts. Overdue is a warm southern rock ballad that sounds like it almost could have had direct inspiration from the Rolling Stones' attempts at the genre on their songs Wild Horses and Winter. Napalm is an up-tempo country rock track with funk sensibilities, serving as one of the more invigorating songs on the album. Closing the record is the piano ballad and title track Salutations, which is the most direct callback to the style of Ruminations that we see here. The track leans on the definition of Salutations as a departure, as it focuses on many themes of separation or growing apart. Oberst mainly uses this theme to touch on relationships, as he proclaims, "It was over before it began. You could have left me in the water, but you made me live again." He continues, "I'm sorry I can't pay you back. I want to hold you till the world dissolves, but we just can't get attached." While it's difficult not to compare this album to Ruminations, Salutations does mostly succeed at its intention of bringing these songs into a new project as its additional tracks unify their vision as a whole. Number 19 is Guided by Voices, How Do You Spell Heaven? Since reforming in 2010, the Ohio-based indie rock veterans Guided by Voices returned with their most immediate record in years with their 25th album, How Do You Spell Heaven? Following the release of their double album earlier in the year, August by Cake, the band shortly followed it up with their most focused effort in recent years, with How Do You Spell Heaven? Some of the album's more infectious cuts bring a revitalized sense of energy for the group, especially on the tracks Birthday Democrats, Paper Cuts, and the bossa nova turned hard rock drive of King 007. Most of the album songs tend to stay in this culmination of blues and alt-rock jams, but the more tender songs on the album are what saved the record from losing its stride. It is the album's 3 final tracks that truly round out this notion, and the record as a whole in low-flying perfection, Nothing Gets You Real, and Just to Show You. It's truly remarkable how frontman Robert Pollard, who currently has more than 2,000 songs to his name, can still be as lucid and exuberant as he is prolific in his work this far down the road of his career. Coming in at number 18 is 6 Scenes by Los Campesinos. The Welsh twee indie noise pop and rock group Los Campesinos come back following a hiatus to release their 6th album, 6 Scenes. From the start of the record, the most notable change is the production, which is way more raw than the slick approach they've been leaning on the past couple of records. It's also abundantly clear that the band has no desire to slow down or come to grips with aging. These themes are blatantly pointed out by frontman Gareth Campesinos, as he recalls depression is a young man's game on the track 5 Flucloxacillin, or Flucloxacillin, and on the album closer Hung Empty, while he admittedly states one would be not right to call this old age, but it certainly ain't youth. While the band is notorious for their youthful and hyperactive style, there are some uncharacteristic somber and melancholic moments on the record as well. The standout moment of this style goes to A Litany, Heart Swells, which sees Gareth touching on a relationship between two people who are both unsatisfied with its tenure, while the other seemingly wants to cut the thread. Now I feel the misery in your breast, and mine is one and the same. I feel close to fine, Gareth confesses, while he then objects, I'm shouting out a litany. An echo calls back, your hand is on the pen, but you can't sign the pact. Other than the softer moments on the record, Los Campesinos don't necessarily shy away from the works of their past while putting out an uneven effort. While their return with 16s is most certainly welcomed by longtime fans of the band, it'll definitely help new ones understand what the band's about. Going further, it would most benefit the band to expand their songwriting into different territory. Number 17 is Lotta Sea Lice by Courtney Barnett and Kurt Vile. Lotta Sea Lice is the collaborative effort between Pennsylvanian folk singer-songwriter Kurt Vile and the Australian indie rocker Courtney Barnett. Both Vile and Barnett released this album as the two broke out following critical acclaim for their previous releases. Vile, formerly of The War on Drugs, had been producing solo albums for nearly a decade before and after leaving the group, while recently putting out his strongly praised record Believe I'm Going Down in 2015. Barnett released her debut album in the same year, entitled Sometimes I Sit and Think, Sometimes I Just Sit, which received wide acclaim, earning her a Grammy nomination for Best New Artist in 2015 and a performance on Saturday Night Live. The two easily could have continued to ride the success of their previous releases on their own, instead opting to join forces for an album full of dual vocals and folk rock guitar melodies. The two don't typically veer into each other's respective styles on their own, but here they managed to make it work for them, almost to the point of sounding like they're covering each other. One of the most enjoyable elements of this record is how gorgeously both of their vocal styles complement each other. There's no better example of this than the album's opening track and lead single, Over Everything. The song begins with a breezy acoustic stride as the two discuss their songwriting processes, while Vile says he likes to sit all by his lonesome without another soul around. Barnett says she speed reads the morning news as she comes up with new ideas. The song progressively ascends as the two harmonized vocals build into the climactic guitar solo towards the end, feeling like a giant wave peacefully crashing along the shore. Some of the stronger duets between the two lay within the tracks Continental Breakfast and Let It Go. Continental Breakfast details the traveling life of a touring musician and the distant friendships that come with it. I cherish my intercontinental friendships. We talk it over Continental Breakfast, Barnett states, then adds, in a hotel somewhere on the sphere around here. The track Let It Go deals with overcoming anxiety to stay motivated creatively and constructively before it takes you over, while relaying over a start and stop lullaby-esque folk hook. Lotta Sea Lice doesn't necessarily get the best of both artists' creative palette, per se, but it would certainly offer new approaches for Vile and Barnett, respectively, while hopefully they can meet again to potentially envision the former. Number 16 is Always Foreign by The World is a Beautiful Place and I Am No Longer Afraid to Die. The World is a Beautiful Place returned with their most political album to date. The band is an emo, indie, and post-rock band hailing from Connecticut. Their third release, Always Foreign, is a series of empathetically driven protest tracks that also delves into the bitterness towards American politics and themselves simultaneously. As contradicting as that may seem, the band does scatter these notions quite effectively and, at times, unabashedly. The track Marine Tigers is the most direct attack on the current state of U.S. politics and possibly President Trump. As frontman David Bellow exclaims, "Can you still call it a country if all the states are broken? Can you still call it a business if all you do is steal?" Then continues to add that making money is a horrible and rotten institution. While Marine Tigers hits at Trump, the band confirmed via Twitter that the song Fuzz Minor is in fact dedicated to him. And when asked by a follower that if that was the case, the band replied more specifically to racists, bigots, xenophobes, and those who support his message. The lyrics are probably the most furiously delivered on the record, going as far as saying, "Call me Arab, call me a spick. I can't wait until I see you die." While the message stems from a place of empathy and concern about ongoing racism in the US, the remarks do come off as extreme. Lyrically, the record is not pleasant. However, the musicality helping deliver these messages is probably the most diverse and well-crafted the band has constructed at this point. The group has consistently been able to please their fan base despite the multiple lineup changes and challenge themselves in the process, cementing their status as one of the more promising acts in their scene. Closing out this video is number 15 with Inter Alia by At the Drive-In. Post-hardcore legends At the Drive-In reunite to deliver their fourth record and their first in 17 years with Inter Alia. The band broke up following the massive success of their highly influential third album, Relationship of Command. Before reforming, the band has been involved in numerous projects over the years, mainly being the psych prog punk rock fusion of the Mars Volta, which featured At the Drive-In original members, lead vocalist Cedric Bixler Zavala, and guitarist Omar Rodriguez Lopez. Amidst the tensions of Mars Volta during their earlier part of the decade, At the Drive-In briefly reunited for a few live shows in 2011, while ruling out new studio material. Following Mars Volta's hiatus in 2012, Rodriguez Lopez focused on his project Bosnian Rainbows, then reunited with Cedric and former Mars Volta drummer David Ellich to form the more straight-ahead punk and alternative project Antimask, with Red Hot Chili Peppers bassist Flea, who had also appeared on previous Mars Volta records with his former Red Hot Chili Peppers bandmate John Frusciante. Antimask released their self-titled debut album in 2014, and the band debuted 8 songs for their still unreleased second album in 2015 entitled Saddle on the Atom Bomb. Shortly after those songs had been released, At the Drive-In agreed to reunite for a second time in late 2015. The band toured sporadically in 2016 before releasing the first single from Inter Alia and the first song in 16 years, Governed by Contagions, on December 8, 2016. Inter Alia was then announced to be released on May 15, 2017 via Rise Records. Inter Alia sees a notable change in At the Drive-In's lineup with the omission of guitarist and backup vocalist Jim Ward, who was replaced by Paul Hinojos, who was in the band Sparta with Ward and drummer Tony Hijjar following the demise of At the Drive-In in 2000. Now that you're all caught up, let's dive into Inter Alia. The album begins with the fantastic opener and raucous banger, No Wolf Like the Present, which absolutely rips from beginning to end, leading into the second track continuing to unleash its fury with Continuum. Another highlight is the first song released from the album, Governed by Contagions, with the most catchy chorus on the record. The album certainly starts out very strong, but midway through you can feel some of the songs starting to blend in, especially with the cut Torrentially Cutshaw coming in at track 9 with no distinct traits, making it stand out compared to the previous 8 songs before it, and the filler Ghost Tape number 9, with its only significance being the slow track on the album to give the record the space that it really doesn't have. While the album doesn't live up to the hype of its landmark predecessor, Relationship of Command, not that it could anyway, especially 17 years later, there's some solid callbacks to that style here. The most obvious stylistic reach to that album are tracks Tilting at the Univender and Call Broken Arrow, with one of the stronger choruses on the record. Inter Alia is the sound of a band regaining chemistry to evolve the style of a genre they helped popularize. I've read reviews slagging this reunion album off as another Antimask record, and I honestly just cannot agree with that idea at all. While they didn't completely find their footing, this is a promising start to where the band could go in the future. And the following Record Store Day Diamante EP, which contains outtakes from this record, definitely give one a deeper look into the process of writing this album. Frontman Cedric recently teased the reunion of the Mars Volta, so who knows where they'll go from here. But anyone who's been paying attention to these guys knows that they've always got a few tricks up their sleeves.